for like the last month before we left, I think we got pretty close. Everybody did. But we didn't know what to expect because the war was supposed to be over. And we kind of thought we were just going to go over there and be security forces for the Iraqi people. I mean, we didn't know the extent of what was going to happen.
Ian Mearns did 2 tours in Iraq. The first one was bad. The second one was worse. But the question you want to ask yourself is, how long can you stay brave? After all, bravery isn't the lack of fear. It's action in the face of it. And every day, Ian acted in the face of fear.
And, at that time, all this stuff with Fallujah, all these insurgents were coming into Fallujah in 2004. We have the Abrams tank. The insurgents had made an IED big enough to blow up a tank. And I don't know if you've ever been around a tank, but that thing is unstoppable. And they were able to blow one of those things up. And it's like, well, if they can do that, what am I going to do in a Humvee or walking, So I was scared. Nobody can say they're not,
What is true bravery? What makes a hero a hero? Tested by the worries of what's happening at home, thousands of miles away, and the reality of what you're facing here and now. When your life is in danger every second, and it's either kill or be killed. From Wondery and Incongruity Media, this is Anthony Russo, and this is War. Being constantly under fire has to take a toll on you. By the end of his second tour, Ian was exhausted. He was exhausted from being alone. He was exhausted from being in the desert. He was exhausted from fortifying bases and hunting IEDs. But most of all, he was exhausted from worrying about how he would die and when. He just accepted the fact that he would die violently in Iraq. And, strangely, that made things a little bit easier. That is, until he got home. As with any story, though, it's really hard to understand the end without starting from the very beginning. And in the beginning, Ian was just a kid trying to find his way in the world like everybody else. But he was having a tough time of it. He didn't have any real prospects, and college was out of the question. The world was demanding answers from him that he just couldn't provide.
My dad was pretty abusive, so I always stayed away from home, and it really affected my grades. So the last day of my junior year in high school, I came home, and my dad told me that if I didn't have college set up by the end of the summer, I'd have to find another place to live. I wasn't even 18 yet, so I looked into doing audio engineering at a place down in Arizona, and then I told my parents I wanted to do that, and they refused to. Well, my dad said, we're not helping you pay for anything. You're doing it on your own. So within the next week or so, the Marine Corps called me, and at first I was like, I'd never do that. I'm not a killer. I was 17, I had long hair, and the recruiter told me, he's like, it's not like that. You're going to be an adult soon. You sound like an intelligent kid. You should just come in and talk to us. So I told my dad that I was going to go talk to him, and I overheard him and my sister telling each other that I wouldn't be able to do it, and it was stupid if I even thought I could do it. And that was really the reason why I joined, is because to show him that I could do it, because he really never had any faith in me.
Committing the next 4 years of his life to the Marines might have seemed like a big decision at the time, but Ian wasn't making a decision. Ian was making a statement. He was making a statement about his independence, and he was making a statement about how he could take control of his future. Most of all, though, Ian wanted to prove his parents wrong. Ian hadn't been a bad kid, but he did run with a questionable crowd. His parents thought he was staying out late, doing drugs, and getting into trouble, but mostly he was just staying out late to avoid being home, to avoid conflict with his father. You see, conflict was really the last thing Ian Mearns ever wanted. And so, at 17 years old, a month before his senior year in high school started, Ian walked into the recruiter's office and signed up for the delayed entry program. He would leave the following July. Next to his name, he wrote the date. It was August 7th, 2001.
I joined August 7th. Up to that point, there had been Kosovo, there'd been Somalia with the Black Hawk Down stuff. Those, and of course the Gulf War, but within the last 10 years, there hadn't been anything. For me, I didn't really understand how much was going on in the world. And then September 11th happened and I joined, and all of a sudden the whole process and the whole entire reality of me going to the Marine Corps is completely different. You know, my job I picked was combat engineer because my recruiter was that, and he said that I would be able to go down to Guatemala and all these different South American countries and help build stuff, but then, you know, meet all these girls and all these things, and filled my head with these, you know, Hollywood things of just traveling the world and having fun and meeting women and doing all these things. But yeah, that was a big difference from joining to actually going. Was like, well, it's a good chance I might actually go to combat. So
from the moment the towers fell that Tuesday morning until the moment he graduated, the decision to enter the Marines weighed on Ian. But it wasn't something he really ever reconsidered, because he still didn't have any prospects, and he started looking around at his friends, and they didn't have any prospects either. Some of them were going to college. Most of them, however, were just going to hang around and do their same jobs with their same girlfriends until they found a better life. Ian didn't want to wait for a better life. He wanted to make one. Plus, it looked like there would be a short war in Afghanistan. It could very well be over by the time he graduated. Even as the spring of 2002 came to an end, and Ian turned his eyes toward his final summer as a kid, it looked like maybe he wouldn't have to go to Afghanistan after all. But as the summer of 2002 wore on, there was increasingly talk about a country named Iraq and a man named Saddam Hussein who might be stockpiling weapons for use against the United States.
At the time, it was all centered in Afghanistan, and it was such a short time from September 11th to when the troops got there. You know, I've actually met some guys who went into Afghanistan when it first happened, and they said that there's tribes there, they're up in these hills, and they had no idea, you know, what was going on. So watching the news, and it looked like no one's going to mess with us if all that stuff is happening over there. But then all this stuff with Saddam and Iraq, and as I got closer and closer to the day I was supposed to leave, all my friends were telling me not to go, and I just had a feeling that if I didn't go, I'd get stuck. All of a sudden, I had like a week left to go, and that was it. And I had to go. And I had a party with my parents. This is a pinnacle moment in my life because my uncle was there, my mom was there, all my neighbors came. We were all together, and that was the last time that happened because my uncle died when I was in boot camp. Some other things happened while I was in the Marine Corps. So it was kind of, I think about it, and those funny things happen when you're growing up. It's kind of like a doorway. You go through it, and all of a sudden I'm in boot camp, and my life will never be the same. And all these people that I grew up with, I'm thinking that I'm going to come back and it'll be the same, but it never was.
They say the point of Marine boot camp is to break you down and then build you back up. But it's something more than that. What the Marines have learned in their last 240 years is the best way to keep a Marine alive is to eliminate the distance between when they hear an order and when they execute it. People who've been through boot camp describe it as a game. It's all mind games, they say. But then they go into combat, and someone shouts, "Hit the deck," and they're on the floor, and the wall above them is destroyed. That's what you learn in the Marine Corps, and Ian learned it as well as anyone else.
We get off the plane, everything's closed, and then there's signs they put up, paper signs like boot camp this way. So we're making jokes, all this shit, we're kids. And then one of the biggest guys I've ever saw, drill instructor, standing there, maybe 6'5", just huge, like a bodybuilder. You know, he starts yelling at us to get on the bus. We get on the bus, but it's not as bad as I thought it was going to be. We get into boot camp, there's a kid crying in front of me. I'm like, this isn't even that big of a deal. What I didn't know is that that's called receiving. And I'm like, this is easy. Like, this boot camp's a joke. Like, this is Marine Corps boot camp. Well, again, I didn't know this, but that whole week you're getting all your stuff. You go into this big theater, and these guys come out, and they look like robots because of the marching stuff they're doing. They presented us our drill instructors, and I'm like, okay, well, these guys look like a little different than the drill instructors up to that point. And I'm nervous because we go in there, and it looks like Full Metal Jacket. And I'm like, what did I get myself into?
In the beginning, boot camp is terrifying. You're sleepless. You're hungry, you're pushed beyond your endurance every day, but then you get used to it. And that's the second point about boot camp: learning to endure and learning to overcome and learning to do without. There's no way to really recreate combat, no way to reproduce the terror that comes from being under enemy fire. But at the Marine Corps Recruitment Depot in San Diego, it wasn't for lack of trying.
This is the crazy thing, is that stuff works if you're in a situation that requires you to move really fast, or if you hear something, you have to do something really quickly, and you don't even think about it.
The true miracle of boot camp, though, is the transformation that takes place. It's important to remember that almost all of the recruits are 18 years old, most of them scared, and many of them just trying to find their place in life. But after boot camp, we see them, and we see the transformation. It's as apparent to us as it is to their friends and to their family. They are more serious. They're disciplined. They walk erect. They have impeccable dress and manners. But if we look deeply into their faces, we can see that they are still children. And we're asking them to bear some of the greatest responsibilities anyone ever can be asked to bear.
I get to graduation and we turn left face and my mom and dad are right there. I waved at my mom. I was so happy to see her. I put my hand up in formation. I wasn't supposed to, just to wave at her. I made it through that stuff and I got out and I came home for my 10 days of leave. And at that point I thought, I was like, oh, I'm done with boot camp. So you go home for 10 days and you're like, cool, but you still have 3 years and 9 months left. So that was boot camp for me.
Even though he still nearly had 4 years left in his term, Ian was excited to be a Marine. After his 10 days home, he headed back to Camp Pendleton to finish his combat training. From there, he headed to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, to be trained as a combat engineer. All in all, it looked like Marine life was going to agree with Ian. He was making friends and he was learning a skill. He was relatively happy in Camp Lejeune, especially as they were preparing for their first mission. The word was they were headed to Guatemala on a construction mission. That was until the world changed. 2003
December, we were learning how to make these brick buildings, and we're supposed to go to Guatemala to do humanitarian stuff, because that was one of the biggest selling issues for me to be a combat engineer, was to go all around the world, build stuff for people, meet beautiful women while you're helping the communities and stuff, because they do that. I had 2 days left before I was supposed to go home for Christmas. Our lieutenant comes down to where we were working, and he's like, all right, guys, I got some bad news for you. We're going to Iraq in January. And he said, we're going to be in Baghdad, because they didn't know. They didn't know security forces in Baghdad. And I was like, oh, shit. But it turned out we were taking over the area that the 82nd Airborne had been in. The 82nd Airborne had been there since the end of the war. And everybody thought once the war was over that everything would go back to normal, which we all know it didn't. So I went home, told my parents, and then came back and we started getting ready to get deployed.
Think back. Try and remember how it felt, the run-up to the war in Iraq, the search for weapons of mass destruction, the expulsion of the UN search teams, shock and awe, President George W. Bush standing upon the deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln declaring, "Mission accomplished." All of this happened after Ian had finished boot camp. He watched it all with the eye of someone who might very well be involved, and he waited. In the meanwhile, Ian had started college, and he had started planning for a life where he avoided combat, where he got to tell the story about how he joined the Marines just before September 11th and wasn't activated until just after the war in Iraq was over. Of course, as it turned out, it was a story he never got to tell.
So when I went home, I had finished my second semester or quarter, and I had 4 classes, so that was a really, really big thing for me. It snowed during that time, and I hurt my dad's car. Well, I heard it, but I was driving and it was snowy and I didn't mean to, and I saw a car coming. I turned the wheel, but it stuck and it went straight, because it barely snows up here in Washington, and when it does, sometimes it's really wet. I ran into a curb and it bent the front wheel pretty bad, and I was like, okay. Then I drove the car still around. I told my parents what happened. Like, okay, we'll get it fixed. So then I go hang out with my friends. About a couple of days before I left, I called home after they had took the car to the shop to get it looked at. And my dad gets on the phone. He's like, you fucking whatever, you come home now, and slam the phone down. And I sat there in my friend's kitchen and I was like, So I called back, my mom answered, and I said, if I come home and he says a fucking word to me about that car, I'm going to put him in the hospital. I'm getting deployed in a week. I hung up the phone and I came home and he was all smiles and, hey, what's going on? So that was a pinnacle for me, because it's kind of the mindset of knowing that I could maybe die. We didn't know. It was a weird time for me. I think it was really transitional. My friends were still doing the same stuff they'd done for the last almost 2 years, drinking, same stuff, nothing changed. And I was still going forward. I'd gone to school already. I was in the Marine Corps. I was getting deployed, to a different country. These guys were still working at jobs that they had in high school. And I was kind of thankful that I was leaving when I left. Before that, I wanted to be home all the time. But that was the first time I was like, this isn't who I am. And I don't want to be here,
As Ian said goodbye for the second time in as many years, he realized that one portion of his life was over. He no longer belonged in Puyallup, or at least he wasn't the kid who had left. He was a man now, he was a Marine. But also, his sense of accomplishment was great because of where he came from, and because of who he'd become. But with the pride and with the sense of accomplishment, there also was a real and deep worry. He wasn't going to Guam. He wasn't going to Guatemala, and he certainly wasn't going to Japan. Ian was going to Iraq. Casualties had not yet been heavy, but people were dying. It was a war. And for all of his training and his preparation, Ian had absolutely no idea what he was headed for.
Are you hiring, posting your position to job sites and waiting for the right people to see it? ZipRecruiter knew there was a smarter way, so they built a platform that finds the right job candidates for you. ZipRecruiter learns what you're looking for, identifies the people with the right experience, and invites them to apply for your job. These invitations have revolutionized how you find your next hire. In fact, 80% of employers who post a job on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate through the site in just one day. And ZipRecruiter doesn't stop there. They even spotlight the strongest applications you receive so you never miss a great match. The right candidates are out there. ZipRecruiter is how to find them. Businesses of all sizes trust ZipRecruiter in their hiring needs. Right now, my listeners can try ZipRecruiter for free. That's right, free. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/thisiswar. That's ZipRecruiter.com/thisiswar. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire.
It would be wrong to say that Ian wasn't afraid, or that the members of the 7th Combat Logistics Battalion weren't completely confident in their mission. But as they headed to Kuwait and then on to Iraq, the word from the guys who had already been deployed was simple. Be careful, but don't be stupid. But as they drove across the desert, the Iraq that Ian would find would not be the Iraq that he expected.
When I drove in, there's a complete disparity between Kuwait and southern Iraq. It's like night and day. There's people living in trailers with gun holes, bullet holes in them, 50 cal bullet holes, using puddles to drink water and to bathe in and everything. And they're coming out and waving at us like we're the next best thing, because we were giving them food and things like that when you go through. That was my first experience with going into Iraq. I expected this nefarious, evil place, and there's people that were just dirt poor. And that, I know what that means now, that phrase, they're just in the dirt with nothing. So we go up, and then finally it starts getting greener because we're getting away from the south of Iraq. And it's really pretty. That was the real thing that really surprised me, was how pretty everything was. It looked tropical, like the sun. I remember we drove up the first day we drove the only city sign I saw that I knew was Al Nazariya, which there had been an ambush in the in the invasion, and I heard stories about that from Marines. And before we'd gone into Iraq, we'd had a meeting, and they're like, we're going to a place that people do actually want to kill you, okay? You do have weapons on each one of us. Just a regular engineer I had 6 magazines, I think. He said that if anything happens, you guys need to use that. Just be both alert and don't be stupid and shoot somebody for no reason.
Tomorrow, someone will try and kill you. This wasn't a game. This wasn't some boot camp mindfuck. This was a real threat, and it was one he'd live under for the rest of his tour. Contrast that with, don't be stupid and shoot anyone. Imagine the pressure. Anyone here could kill you, but most people here don't want to. And your mission is to try not to find out the hard way that you didn't shoot the right person or let the wrong person live. Although they weren't trained as grunts, Ian and the rest of the combat engineers, being Marines, had been trained to kill. During Marine Combat Training School, they learned to use all their weapons effectively. They learned to fight. They learned to shoot. They learned to throw grenades. And they learned to do all of it judiciously. Except when they were learning how to decide who to shoot and who not to shoot, none of them were dying. Now that they were in Iraq, that would change. Marines would die, and it would be incumbent upon the rest of them to judge how they responded to each death, and to try and respond accordingly.
But before we got there, there's a little town outside, and one of our smokestacks in our truck got caught on these wires up above us. And up until this time, we'd had Iraqis, police forces providing security with us. I almost shot one of them because he had an AK-47 with a Tommy gun thing on the bottom, and I didn't know who he was. And then I was like, oh shit, I'm a stupid kid. And I took my rifle up and started pointing at him, and then I saw a Marine standing next to him, just for that reason, I think, because everyone is scared as shit. So, I mean, we didn't know. We see people with guns. We didn't, we're expecting to get shot at. I mean, that was me. Maybe not everybody, but I was scared. When I saw him with a gun, I didn't know who he was because they're not wearing uniforms. That was the other thing, So the truck got stuck on a smokestack, and we got out, and they're trying to go back and forth, and this kid gets on the fucking truck. I'll always remember this. And my lieutenant's like, my last name's Mearns, and he's like, Mearns, get him off. And I was like, okay. And I'm waving at him. He's like, why is he on there? Get him off that truck. And he's a lieutenant, and I'm a Lance Corporal E3. And finally, I fucking put my gun to his face, and he gets off the truck. And this kid was like 3 years old, and it didn't really register with me until I went home. I went to the mall, and I saw kids, and I was like, it just fucking sucked. The kid's whole family was right there. I just pointed a gun at the kid's face, and they look like they want to kill me. So then I get defensive and start making faces back at them, and it's just and that was my first interaction with an Iraqi person. So, yeah.
They say you should never point a gun at anything you're not prepared to shoot. In his first few hours in Iraq, Ian had pointed his at a police officer and a child. He was already feeling a little under siege and a little amped up. He had come to Iraq understanding that he might have to use his weapon, but he didn't understand the full implications of that until he had pointed his gun at a child. That kid wouldn't be the last person that Ian pointed his gun at. Pointing his gun was something that he was going to have to do a lot, especially in his second tour. After the conflict with the boy, Ian was happy to arrive at Al-Assad, where he'd be stationed for the next 8 months. It was known as Camp Cupcake because it had plenty of hot running water, electricity, better food even than at Camp Lejeune, and telephone access. There also was a limited amount of what counted as internet access in Iraq in 2003. Plus, for Ian, there still was something of a thrill of being stationed abroad. Camp Cupcake was about 100 miles northwest of Baghdad, and while there, Ian realized that Iraq had its own particular beauty. The base itself encompassed Wadi, These were small green depressions that filled with water during the rainy season and retained it throughout the dry. It gave a special alien quality to the landscape that reminded Ian that not only wasn't he at home, but he was at a place completely unfamiliar to him. Sure, it wasn't Japan, it wasn't even Guam, but also, and more important, it wasn't Puyallup, Washington. So Ian settled in for his tour, expecting to spend the next 6 months on basic patrols, checking to make sure things were locked, making sure the base was secure, and occasionally getting out and building things in Iraq. During the day, or if he had extra time on his shift, he might stop by the PX. One night he did just that with his friend Top. They were hanging around trying to decide if they should make some phone calls or see if they could get online, and then they decided to finish their rounds. They were on their way back to the base when the shelling started. And once it started, it became his constant companion for the rest of his tour.
So we're walking down and we're like about to get into the wadi, and there's a service road on either side too. So we're on the blacktop going down, and this fucking explosion goes off to the left of us. It's way far away, like 2 football fields. And I'm like, dude, what's the EOD doing? And Top's like, they don't do EOD at night. They call it walking it in. So they shoot a mortar, they move the tube barely any millimeters or whatever the case, and then fire again. But that trajectory is much further when it lands. So they started walking him in, and I was terrified. I didn't know what the fuck was going on. I started running, and once you get an adrenaline dump like that, like it felt like my legs were jelly. I had on a sweatshirt and my rifle and my cami top, and I could not run fast enough. And my buddy was running faster than me. And we get up to the top, and I just remember the mortars, them coming in, but apparently they'd hit over by the barracks that were to the left of us. And an individual got hit, and the shrapnel hit him in the privates. And we were running up there because he was screaming for help. He was screaming for his mom. And the MPs were out, and they said, go back to your barracks. So we found out later what had happened to him. And I was like, I was shook up. I was really, really upset. Really, we both were. And then in the morning, if we found out that in front of that place where we'd been talking on the phone, a freak mortar or rocket came and hit a truck, right? Like a million in one shot. There's some guys, or 1 or 2 guys sitting in the back, and it blew them up. And they had to use fucking push brooms to push all the blood out of the back of the truck. And I remember going there, and there's still this stain in the ground from the explosion and everything. And that was like, I think I'm in a fucking country that doesn't like us.
Think of your last near miss, say, avoiding a car accident by a couple of inches and stopping just in the nick of time. Try and remember feeling that terrible adrenaline that you don't need and that you can't use. Now imagine that feeling weekly, daily, hourly. The first mortar attack began a series of harassment that would continue throughout the tour. It wasn't so much the danger, although that was a part of it. Instead, it was the constant anticipation that started to wear on Ian and the rest of the Marines.
One of the things I did after I got off watching the barracks was go over to the gym, because they had a sweet gym there too. So I wasn't complaining. I wasn't doing hard labor. I was watching the barracks and then going to the gym and trying not to get blown up by mortars. This one night I get off in the morning and my replacement comes. He said, can you give me a couple minutes before, because I have to use the restroom, because he just went to the gym too. I'm like, dude, that's fine. I'll wait for you. And if you want to wait another hour, that's fine too. I'm just reading this book. If he wouldn't have said that, I would have walked outside and gone over to the gym. So as soon as he comes back, it sounded like a jet was taking off outside, and it was a rocket coming in. And you know when you hear a jet take off, like the afterburn sound, imagine that like 1,000 times louder and directly outside. And they turned out they were French rockets. And that was another thing. They found out that insurgents got rockets from France somehow. The dirt there was so compact. Like we broke tools trying to dig into it. And this rocket put a hole in the ground like 3 feet down. I think it was 2 or 3 rockets hit. And one right outside the barracks. And I almost shit myself. It was so loud. Like that's how loud it was. I'd never felt so scared at that time. That was the first time anything like that had happened that close to me. Another one hit outside, and then another one hit out by the gym, and it terrified me. So after that, I would hear shit and I'd jump on the ground. Like, they had garbage trucks on this big base. They're little tiny ones, but the metal lid would hit. And I remember that happened, and I jumped straight on my face down on the ground because I thought I was a mortar. And these fucking pieces of shit are laughing at me because they saw me jump on the ground. I felt that we were just on this base. I hadn't done shit to anybody, and they're fucking trying to kill us. And now they're laughing at me because I'm scared to death, So after a couple of weeks of being there, we got sent to Al-Qaim.
It was there, in Al-Qaim, along the Iraq-Syrian border, that the combat engineers' mission truly began. They were building bunkers and SWA huts and putting up wire, everything they could do to help make it a little safer for the Force Recon Marines who were out on patrol. They spent weeks in the desert, building fortifications and repairing roads, while their fellow Marines were chasing insurgents and contending with IEDs.
We were told we were supposed to go back to Al-Assad, so we get all our stuff ready, and we were leaving to go back to Al-Assad, and we were staging area where all the vehicles are ready to go. And I can't remember what happened, but they told us we couldn't go. And lieutenant and the captain are like, well, we should just go back to that bunker because it's safer there, And so we did. And no shit, the same exact area where we were got mortared that night. It was like the same kind of thing when it happened with my buddy Top. I had my fucking headphones on. I'm laying down on top of this bunker. I think some asshole's jumping next to me. And I take him off, and there's an explosion right on the other side of the berm. It was a sand pit, and we made all the sandbags from there. So that saved us because the mortar hit on one side and the other, and they just smoked the area where we would have been staged at if we would have stayed there. So somebody went out and told them that we were sleeping there that night, and we fucking moved, and we saved our lives. During that time, the infantry a lot of guys got killed and hurt, and it was really disheartening to be around that and just to see those guys just like talking to some of them at the chow hall. They said it was like being back home in gangs because they'd go out, they'd shoot one of them, then they'd go out the next day and shoot one of the insurgents. The job that we had was so interesting because we were attached to these super crazy units, and then we were doing monotonous tasks, like putting sandbags together or nailing something.
After nearly a year deployed, Ian's tour was over and he headed home. But what he discovered when he got there shocked him. You see, the war wasn't very popular at all with many of his friends, and even with a lot of his neighbors.
When I got home, there'd been all these marches in New York and some other places, and there was people that had put signs in their windows saying, "We support the insurgents." And I saw that, and I was so upset about it. And my best friend Dave, I grew up with, we went to see Jack Johnson concert, and this fucking guy told me that I was brainwashed by the Marine Corps, and whatever I did, I didn't know because I was a robot. I grabbed that guy by his throat, dude, and slammed his fucking head on the wall. And all my friends grabbed me, and I'm glad that they did because I was gonna do anything I could to make him shut up. I didn't feel like I was a part of anything anymore. I felt really disconnected. Some of the friends I'd been friends with since I was younger were just, like I said before, they were doing the same things, but they'd also matured. Some of them had been doing really well. I felt like I was missing out. At one hand, I was missing out on all the, being able to have a girlfriend and all that stuff, but I didn't feel like I was a part of any of it.
If there was a highlight for Ian, it was how happy his mother was to see him. She was proud of how well he'd done for himself and relieved that he'd come home safe. But he wouldn't be home for long. Ian was slated to go back to Iraq, and he spent the next few months training. But this training was different for two reasons. First, this time his mission was clear. He would be going to Iraq to build forward operating bases for fellow Marines. Second, he'd been there before, and he knew what to expect. Or at least he thought he did.
Well, like the first time I went there was very scary. The second time was terrifying. I can't put into words how difficult it was to be looking for these roadside bombs and not knowing where they were, and knowing that people you've known have been killed by them. And the first time I went there, that wasn't really an issue, because the insurgency was just building up, and a lot of the stuff was in Fallujah, and Fallujah was just down the road. And like, we left in September time of 2004. It wasn't night and day particularly, it was just different. And thinking about it, there was, like, we went to Haditha, which was, there's Haditha Dam. There's an incident called the Haditha Massacre, where this individual got out of his car and they shot him, and then somebody shot them from a house, and they ran in the house and they threw grenades in, and that's that's protocol. And there's fucking kids in there, and they went in, they tried court-martialing these guys, and that kind of stuff was going on, and they'd come out and talk to us about it. And it's like, well, what the fuck are we doing here? I never fucking mowed down anybody. I wasn't one of the infantry guys doing that kind of shit. But just the idea that people that we know are dying, and they're gonna fucking put us in jail for it. Like, I don't know.
Chaos and confusion reigned in Iraq in a way that just didn't seem possible to Ian merely a year before. It wasn't just the combat, and it wasn't just the casualties. It was the insidiousness with which they all occurred. As an example, one of the combat engineers' responsibility was to repair and rebuild the roads of Iraq. So Ian and his team would go out every day and they would fill potholes. But at night, the insurgents would dig up the patches and insert IEDs. The next day, there would be an explosion, and sometimes a death. And so let's think about that question we started with. How long can you stay brave? Ian made it 4 years, or so he thought. But along the way, he left some of his humanity back in Iraq.
It's me and my friend, and we're laying out in this courtyard place, and we start getting rocketed, and we're like, at that time I was just like, fuck it. Like, I didn't care, because if I run inside, it's gonna hit anyways. If I stay where we're at, and nobody else moved, we just watched it, because it happened so much. It happened so many times at that point. We didn't move. And in the morning we talked about it, and it's like, how fucked up is that? No one moved, no one ran to get cover, because there's nothing you could do. I know in my heart, if I had to, I would have done anything to save somebody or do whatever. But I knew that, I knew for a fact I was going to die. And that fear is so pervasive, because I would see people I was friends with that had been throughout the Marine Corps. My buddy, I saw his interpreter had just got his fucking head cut off with 4 other interpreters because they were helping out us. And like, yeah, dude, we just found the bodies. We found the heads first, and we just buried them, like, nonchalant, Or this guy got shot. We shot somebody in the neck, and because he didn't stop in time, I was fucking laughing. Like, I didn't care. I was like, okay, like, what does it matter if they don't give a fucking shit about us, and they're trying to blow us up all the time. So that's what I felt like. And I came home the second time, I was completely different. Everyone said it too.
One of those people was his mother. She sensed a weight about him and tried to get him to open up, but even she couldn't get through. It was just that he couldn't explain what was going on. And it wasn't because Ian was stubborn, it was because, what can you say? He'd been holding back for 4 years. And he would hold back for almost another decade.
I came back home, and my mom wanted to talk to me about everything. And she was like, how was it? what was it like? I was like, I don't want to talk about this shit. She wanted me to stay in and become an officer. And I was like, you know what it was like, Mom? It was like having a fucking colonel that tells us to do something and then turns around and tells us to do something else because he's an idiot, and that 2 people get killed and my friend gets blown up too because they wanted to show off for some general. Okay, that's what it was fucking like. She started crying. And I was like, why are you crying? You guys wanted me to fucking go there, so I went. And now I'm back, and like, what's, you know, it's just stupid. And so it wasn't very good coming back home. I was really fucked up. I couldn't stand still in the house. When I was back in North Carolina, I was fine. But I drank every day. You know, I drank all the time. I had about a month left of the Marine Corps, and I get a call from my dad saying my mom had a stroke. And so I came home. I surprised my mom, which was really cool. She didn't know I was coming home. She was getting better super fast, which wasn't supposed to happen. And it wasn't because it wasn't a stroke. It turns out she has cancer. It started in her colon. It went to her liver, and it's in her brain. I was really hard. I just came back from this environment that was so just, rigid. And my mom's sick. 2 weeks later, she died. I was the last person to talk to her.
Karen Mearns died in 2006, just after Ian's discharge. Ian tried to find his way forward. He finished college. He took his master's degree, and he got a job as a social worker. But inside, there was a festering rage, part fear, part anxiety, and part anger. It was something he could talk about with very few people. One of them was a fellow Marine named Byron. They were close. Byron went through a bad divorce, moved across the country, got a young girlfriend, and continued to drink heavily. One night in a drunken rage, he beat her, and then he took his own life. Ian was devastated when he found out. He'd lost a lot of friends since coming home, some to drugs, some to alcohol, some to suicide, but really, all to the war in Iraq. And then, in the summer of 2017, more than a decade after he turned in his uniform, Ian nearly became a casualty himself. A victim of the consequences of staying brave for far too long.
And I think about the fear of knowing that you're going to die and seeing it and then not having it happen and then getting out and trying to be a person and not I don't want to be a victim. But I got arrested last summer because I had a psychotic break and I almost killed the girl I was with. I could have, I didn't. And she called the police. And if I wouldn't have gotten in trouble and gotten to help with my PTSD and all this garbage, I would probably have, I don't know what I've done. My friend died, and I don't know who else is gonna die in the near future. I have a lot of friends I'm worried about all the time, and it's then I went to the hospital and I was so fucked up and I realized how sick I am. And it's okay to feel, that's the thing that's the worst is that having these emotions and just being a human, it's really hard to go through all that stuff. And I'm no hero. I thought about this all day coming up here. I never wanted to be in a position where people that I love were taken from me, and I want people to understand how hard it is just to try to be a human. I'm in my second master's program now, and I've devoted my life to helping people, and I will do that. I will do anything for somebody in need. But for the longest time, I couldn't even look at myself in the mirror. Why are you here? What's the fucking purpose of your being here? You know, all that shit that happened in Iraq, like, you should have died there. And that's like how so many of my friends think. We talk about it all the time. And it's just so hard, you know. And I don't know, and that's like the thing that just like eats people alive. Have this tough exterior, inside you're just like, you just feel like the biggest piece of shit. And when I finally went to the VA, I had all these people there that had been through way worse stuff than me, or had been through nothing like I had been through. We all talked, and we all had the same feelings, and it was the first time I felt like I wasn't alone. And I thank God that I got arrested. I thank God that I had to go to do this PTSD stuff. When I finally got the charges dismissed, I thank the judge, and I'm in tears right now, and it's just like thinking about it, like I did lose everything, after that happened.
Not all deaths are physical. The Ian Mearns who wanted to get free of his fear, the fear of his home life, the fear of a meaningless existence, the fear of a violent death, that Ian Mearns succumbed to the reality that fear is not something that we conquer. Fear is something that we endure. We make our fears a part of us. We come to understand and recognize them and know that, even when we beat them, they will be replaced by other fears. We all are targets of the future, and it is just a matter of time before it hones in and finally catches up with us. Next time on This Is War.
I remember feeling pretty good, just regular sunny day. We were tasked with going down Main Street, and I forget what we were promoting, but we had these flyers, and as we're handing them out, an IED explodes. I blacked out for a second, and I remember this feeling like I was drowning. So I'm just gasping for air, trying to just trying to breathe.
Subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you're listening right now. To find a link to subscribe to This Is War, show notes, and more information, simply tap or swipe over the cover art. You'll also see offers from our sponsors. Please help support our shows by supporting them. If you like what you've heard, we'd love it if you would give us a 5-star rating and review, and be sure to tell your friends and show them how to subscribe. Another way you can support the show is by filling out a small survey at wondery.com/survey. Are you a combat veteran, or do you know one with a story to tell? Reach out to us at stories@thisiswar.com with your dates and branch of service and a brief description of the experience you'd like to share. If you would like to hear more of This Is War and other Wondery shows, in addition to extra content, early access, and exclusive perks, you can subscribe at Wondery Plus. Go to wondery.com/plus. I'm Anthony Russo. This Is War was produced by Incongruity Media. Executive producer Hernan Lopez for Wondery.